One realizes my generation has passed when I see that our keynoter, John Brennan, was born after I was already a CIA employee. While our careers were separated by time and substance, I learned of his reputation for expertise and wisdom on the Middle Eastern reality. His generous appearance in one of my classes was enthusiastically received. In March 2013, John became DCIA after serving 4 years as Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. 4 years marked by probably the most intensive counterterrorism programs in U.S. history. While CIA previously had professional intelligence officers as director, Helms and Colby in operations, Gates in analysis, John Brennan is the first to have leadership experience in both analysis and ops. Thus, he brings very rich insight to the job, protecting our citizens and preserving our nation. Theodore Roosevelt's quote is appropriate. "It is not the critic who counts, but credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who strives valiantly, who strives to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement." John Brennan has been in the arena. He lives the call of an intelligence officer, imagination and agility, integrity and love of freedom. As a veteran of CIA, as a faculty member at Georgetown, I am honored to introduce my friend, John Brennan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Burton, not only for your very, very kind words, but also for your 39 years of distinguished service as a CIA officer, and for your invaluable contributions to the study of the intelligence profession while you were a CIA officer, but also ever since that day that you retired. And it is an honor and pleasure to have you with us here today, as well as with all the other distinguished guests. Of course, I want to thank President DeGioia and everyone at Georgetown University for co-sponsoring this conference. There is simply no institution better suited to host a discussion of the topics we are tackling today. And it is a privilege for me to be here among the students and faculty of this great school. I also want to say to the students and faculty of this great school is that if you couldn't get into my alma mater, Fordham University, the Jesuit institution of North America, I'm glad you made it to Georgetown. It's the way to endear myself with the audience, right? As you know, the Central Intelligence Agency does not hold a lot of public conferences. Our foreign counterparts tend to hold even fewer, as in 0. But like any other part of the United States government, the agency and our intelligence community partners must have the trust and confidence of the American people in order to do our job. To that end, I firmly believe that we must engage our fellow citizens and, to the extent we can, explain our work, the work we perform on their behalf, and articulate our motives, our values, and our objectives. Just as importantly, we need to listen to what people have to say and to hear the views of outside experts. CIA is very much a learning organization, one that makes a deliberate effort to learn from the past, adapt to the times, and refine its methods. This event was envisioned as an open forum from which we can all learn and benefit. Now, I want to take a moment to shed some light on the origin of the conference title, The Ethos and Profession of Intelligence, and to offer some thoughts on the subject itself. Too often, the intelligence community is treated as a monolith, almost a mechanical entity rather than what it really is, which is a constellation of very talented, very committed women and men guided by a professional ethos with many dimensions: service, integrity, excellence, courage, teamwork, and stewardship, among others. Our identity as Americans decisively shapes how we approach our work. We are acutely aware of the extraordinary authorities with which our government, indeed our fellow citizens, have entrusted us. And we feel a deep and abiding obligation to justify and earn that trust on a daily basis. Likewise, We readily accept that the bar is set higher for us, in part because of the natural tension that has always existed between the secrecy our mission requires and the openness of the society we serve. Intelligence has been critical to our national interests and security since George Washington personally directed espionage networks during the founding of our nation. In subsequent years, America's efforts were mostly tactical and long confined to the military realm. And it wasn't until 1947 that the United States finally did what every other great power had done: established a civilian intelligence service for both peacetime and for war. President Truman did so to counter the growing Soviet threat to the post-war environment and to gain better insight into political, social, economic, and military developments worldwide. I joined that service, the Central Intelligence Agency, in 1980. I believed in its mission then, and I believe even more strongly in it today. We have had the great fortune over the past 67 years to play an important role in keeping this nation strong and its people safe from the constantly evolving array of overseas threats. Today, and certainly not for the first time in our history, America's intelligence community is at a crossroads. The transformational impact of technology and enhanced scrutiny and skepticism of the value, legality, and appropriateness of our mission have prompted a re-examination of the work of intelligence agencies, understandably and rightly so. But this re-examination is taking place at a time when our nation faces an ever-growing list of national security challenges, one that, in my view, has few precedents in our history. To be sure, we have confronted grave threats before, some of them even more serious individually than the ones before us today. But rarely have we encountered such a bewildering variety of challenges and threats all at once. Just consider the events that are playing out on the world stage. We see a terrorist threat that is atomizing into a patchwork of extremist groups across several continents, undermining political stability and basic law and order, and presenting new dangers to American interests. We see determined efforts to acquire the means for producing weapons of mass destruction. We see the tragedy of human trafficking and the ruthless tactics of drug cartels seeking to protect and expand their turf. In far too many countries, we see civil strife and violent conflicts over religion, land, political ascendance, sectarianism, and access to food and water. We see the growth of ungoverned spaces where extremists can take root. And we see the rise of groups like Boko Haram that are preying on the innocent, kidnapping girls for simply going to school. In the past year, territorial disputes between nation-states, the cause of so much suffering in the last century, have returned to the fore, most notably in eastern and southern Ukraine and in the waters of the East and South China Seas. At the same time, the world is grappling with a new breed of challenges enabled by advanced technology, with cyber attacks unfolding on a massive scale as rival nations, criminal groups, and hacktivists seek to exploit vulnerabilities in the digital domain. In this dangerous and dynamic world, intelligence and corresponding analysis are key to identifying, understanding, and successfully addressing the myriad national security issues that confront policymakers. The complexity of this task is hard to overstate. It is one thing to report on a crisis that has already happened, to identify the key players, to map out their support networks, and to describe their methods and their motivations. It is something else entirely to put all that information together in advance before an event occurs, and to provide it to policymakers with enough time and enough precision for them to act. This is the mission to which CIA officers dedicate their lives. While we do not have a crystal ball, we have an obligation as intelligence professionals to look beyond the next horizon, to not only highlight key events around the globe, but to explain the forces that are likely to shape those developments in the weeks, months, and years to come. Now, we do not always get it right. We have made mistakes. We have made more than a few mistakes, and we have tried mightily to learn from them. But every day, CI officers go to enormous lengths to anticipate future threats and to thwart the plans of those who would threaten our freedom and our security. Our contributions span the gamut of national security challenges. We work with our military, law enforcement, and diplomatic colleagues, as well as with our allies and partners overseas, to prevent devastating terrorist attacks, whether they be aimed at our homeland or at targets on foreign soil. We help protect our nation and our fellow Americans from cyber attacks. We support efforts to interdict shipments of illicit arms, to dismantle drug cartels, and to break up syndicates engaged in human trafficking. And we build the capacity of foreign security and intelligence forces so that they can address the threats arising inside their own borders. Increasingly, governments around the globe recognize that no matter how capable they believe their military, security, and intelligence agencies might be, no nation can counter the plethora of 21st century transnational threats on its own. Over the past 5 years alone, there have been major developments that have altered the course of world events. Chief among them, the political upheavals associated with the so-called Arab Spring. From day one, CIA has played a central role in helping our policymakers navigate this rapidly changing landscape. The fact is, good intelligence, timely, accurate, and insightful, is the cornerstone of almost every aspect of national security policy today, from military action to diplomacy to international law enforcement. With it, our policymakers see an issue in its entirety, with the risks, challenges, and opportunities clearly delineated. Without it, our government would have to make its way in the treacherous global arena nearly blind. Most of our work supporting policymakers involves information, collecting it, analyzing it, and getting it to the people who need it. But we do more than that. When directed by the President, we also use our covert action authorities to help advance U.S. foreign policy objectives. For all these reasons, CIA is a truly indispensable agency. As former CIA director and former President George Herbert Walker Bush put it in 1991, intelligence remains our basic national instrument for anticipating danger, military, political, and economic. Those words are as true today as they were then. In fact, given the number of threats and foreign policy challenges facing our country and how difficult they are to track, I would argue that the CIA has never been more important to the strength and the security of our republic. The question facing us today is how to ensure that our contribution to national security remains as positive and as meaningful in the future as it has been in the past. This is the fundamental challenge facing our agency today, as we confront not only sweeping technological change that affects every aspect of our daily lives, but also evolving considerations, policies, and yes, legal frameworks about the appropriate and necessary role of intelligence in an open society. Now, you have heard some very informed and insightful views this morning on technology in the private sector and how they relate to our work. I would now like to offer some thoughts on the subjects to be addressed in our afternoon panels: the role of intelligence in the 21st century, and the need to strike a proper balance between secrecy and accountability. As we position our agency for the future, one of our main challenges is how to remain relevant in the digital information age. Information technology has transformed the world since I first embarked on my intelligence career. Today's 24/7 news outlets and social media provide instant coverage and analysis of global developments. The near monopoly our stations and bases overseas once enjoyed in covering fast-breaking developments for policymakers, particularly in remote corners of the world, is long gone. In the business world, we have seen once great corporations decline and collapse when they fail to keep up with the times. To avoid that fate, CIA and our community partners must continually adapt if we are to compete with the ever-growing, ever-accelerating supply of information and analysis. As a former policymaker myself, I can assure you that CIA still provides information and analysis that social media, news organizations, and our foreign intelligence partners simply cannot. A key reason is the type of information our agency collects, not just intelligence, but human intelligence. For all the technical wizardry that is currently available worldwide, nothing can replace the insight that comes from a well-connected human source. At their best, human sources go beyond the dry facts of an issue and help discern the intent of an adversary, precisely the edge that our policymakers are looking for. As former CIA Director Richard Helms once said, Gadgets cannot divine man's intentions. One of CIA's main challenges in the coming years, then, is to make the most of this advantage. We must focus our efforts on uncovering secrets that only human sources can acquire, those that are typically locked inside the inner circle of an adversary. These are the hardest of hard targets, but they are ones that CIA is especially well equipped to pursue. Looking ahead, another big challenge for CIA will be cyberspace, figuring out how to take advantage of the opportunities while mitigating the risks. For the intelligence community, the cyber world is a double-edged sword. Digital footprints may enable us to track down a suspected terrorist, but they may leave our officers vulnerable as well. Websites and digital platforms can shed light on the practices of despotic regimes, but they can also be used to inspire violence against our citizens and interests. And while our networks allow us to communicate instantly across the globe, they also can be targeted by hackers seeking to disrupt our operations and steal our information. Now, the same is true for the private sector, where American businesses and institutions of all stripes are fending off repeated efforts to intercept their communications, shut down their networks, and harvest their know-how. But for the intelligence community, the problem is much more than cyber attacks per se. It is also about the technologies that make it possible to study bomb making on the internet, to case a target remotely, and to coordinate among far-flung associates in order to carry out a sophisticated attack. Aided by the cyber domain, individuals and small groups, not only nation-states, now have the power to sow enormous destruction, greatly expanding the number of threats that our government must monitor to keep our nation safe. Indeed, there is hardly an intelligence problem today that is not affected to a large degree by that digital domain. It is where so many of life's basic transactions are now taking place: social, financial, political, commercial, educational, and yes, intelligence. Yet it still remains our planet's new and relatively uncharted frontier. If we are to understand the world we cover and to provide our policymakers with the intelligence that they expect, if not demand, we must immerse ourselves in that frontier and adjust our tradecraft accordingly. In developing powerful tools to meet this challenge, CIA and the community partners face a question that may be unprecedented in our history. If we possess an extraordinary technical capability and are legally authorized to use it, should we necessarily do so? If this were asked on September 12, 2001, we could be reasonably certain of the answer. From the vantage point of that terrible crisis, the fact that we are asking this question now would be seen as a remarkable change. But this question is made possible by the tremendous strides we have made over the past 13 years in strengthening our national security. The question of foregoing a collection capability also reflects the complexity of our mission in a world that is becoming intensely interconnected. Boundaries between domestic and foreign communications are disappearing rapidly in a world vastly different from the one that existed at CIA's founding. The Soviets were a closed society with a communications network largely segregated from that of the free world. The enormous collection effort fielded against their vast military complex carried little or no legal or moral ambiguity for us. But the terrorists we face today routinely use the same channels everyone else does. And of course, it is that distinction, confronting an enemy who seeks to operate within our own borders, who use our own infrastructure, and who rely in part on the protections provided by our own laws and regulations, that lies at the heart of the thorniest issues under debate in this country and free societies everywhere. Now, I think we all seek a common goal: to strike an appropriate balance between the need to protect civil liberties and the need to protect the lives of our citizens. And wherever that equilibrium may lie, we know it is a moving target. It tends to swing back and forth between periods in which society is preoccupied by external threats and those in which it is preoccupied by a sense that the government's response to those threats may have strayed from principle or even the law. Even as we move to achieve a balance that is responsive to what the times demand, we must be mindful that there are natural limits to how open any espionage service can be. As intelligence officers, we at CIA have a solemn obligation to safeguard not only the nation we serve, but the sources and methods, and yes, the people that enable us to do so. Stewardship is an essential element of our professional ethos. We must honor it as surely as the oath we take to defend the Constitution. As I've said, we in the intelligence community act on behalf of the American people. Every power we have, every authority with which we are entrusted, comes from them. And just as our tradecraft must keep pace with technology if we are to accomplish our mission, so too must our decisions faithfully reflect the will of the American people. Now, President Obama already has taken a number of steps to provide greater accountability and insight into the work of our community. These measures largely address the operations of our colleagues at the National Security Agency, but they set clear direction for all of us in the intelligence community. CIA is committed to charting a way forward that, in the President's words, secures the life of our nation while preserving the liberties that make our nation worth fighting for. Ultimately, that is the ethos that guides our profession and guides our workforce. While much of what we do must remain secret, our actions must conform in every instance to the values and principles upon which our great nation was founded. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you very much, Director Brennan, for your very candid and insightful remarks. And we'll now, until about 2 o'clock, take questions from the audience. Those of you in the balcony who have questions, please make your way down and queue up at the microphone. And while the rest of you are assembling behind there, I'll exercise my moderator's privilege and toss the first one at you. How about that?
Okay. I don't think I have a choice.
Talk about a captive audience. Recently, the agency enunciated a new policy in operations by stating that it would no longer use vaccination programs for operational purposes. What was behind that change in policy, and what are its implications for our activities in foreign countries?
Well, as Director of CIA, I have a responsibility on a daily basis to make sure that the operations we run, the activities we engage in, are consistent with what I believe is the spirit and intent, not only of the law, but also in terms of making sure that we really are contributing to not just national security, but international security. Shortly after I came on board as director in March of last year, there were a number of issues that I took a look at. And it's no surprise that there was a fair amount of press and media attention to reported agency activities in the vaccination realm. And so I decided that I would take the action of telling our folks that we will not use vaccination programs, vaccination workers, for any of our operational activities. We will not seek or exploit DNA that might be collected during those vaccination programs. When I look at the challenges that the international health community faces throughout the world, irrespective of the perception of the reality of certain reports, I do believe it's CIA's responsibility, just like the rest of the U.S. government, to do what we can to contribute to international well-being and health. And I believe that some elements have used the canard of sort of agency activities in different parts of the world as a way to stymie a number of these very, very important and worthwhile efforts. So I gave direction after consulting with our folks, and there was consensus that this was the right thing to do. So I gave that direction that, again, that we would not, irrespective of citizenship or wherever in the globe, we would not make operational use of those vaccination programs or workers.
Thank you. Those of you posing questions, again, as I admonished everyone in the morning, and everybody's been very good about following my admonition, pointed questions, no statements, no reminiscences, just...
Okay. You're tough.
Fire away.
A question that comes up frequently in the discussion of oversight of intelligence, both by formal oversight bodies as well as oversight and evaluation of intelligence by the American people, is the tension between the complexity and specialization of intelligence versus generic openness and often knee-jerk reactions. What programs do you intend to carry on with, including things like this conference, but where do you think we as the intelligence community can tread the line in helping people become expert enough to make good decisions about US intelligence without giving up our capabilities?
I believe it's very important for intelligence professionals to be able to engage publicly in this discussion and debate. I think sometimes the narrative is distorted as far as what the intelligence agencies are doing. And I think it is important for us to be as open as we can in terms of the types of programs, activities that we are involved in. Now, we can't go into details of a lot of those operational activities, but I have made a decision that I'm going to try to engage more publicly because, and I'm glad to see that there are many members of the press that are here that are taking copious notes. Because I think that sometimes the intelligence community's reluctance to engage has come at our own peril. And I do believe it's important for us to be able to engage. Now, I think there's also a responsibility on the part of the press to make sure that they try to report as accurately and as fairly as possible. And there are too many distortions that are out there, in my view. That doesn't mean that there are not shortcomings of the intelligence community, and we need to acknowledge when we can and when we should. So that oversight function, I think, is critically important, whether it be on the congressional oversight front or the American public front or on the press. And as I mentioned in my remarks, there is a tension at some point between that transparency and openness and our obligation to keep things secret, clandestine, covert. And so that's going to be, I think, an enduring tension. But I certainly had the opportunity when I was down at the White House to be able to speak openly on policy issues on the counterterrorism, homeland security front that enabled me to engage with the American public in a way that I think is important. And to the extent that I can do that as an intelligence professional and as a representative of CIA, I plan to continue.
Sir, Ryan Tepperman, a graduate of the Security Studies program. Thanks for coming here to speak with us today. I'd like to ask you about issue of warning as well as opportunity analysis. You spoke earlier of the number of growing challenges to our national security that we have to deal with. How, in the context of all those challenges, how does the U.S. provide effective warning for all those and ensure that policymakers take them seriously? And second, should the IC have a role increasingly of providing opportunity analysis of opportunities when those threats emerge, highlighting those to policymakers in the context of warning?
On the warning function, I think that's critically important. And I think this is continuing to be an evolving discipline within the intelligence community. And I think we've made a lot of strides over the last 10 or 15 years as a result of, I think, some shortcomings in some of the analysis that was done. And it's critically important that we're able to, as intelligence community, distinguish between capabilities and intent. And I think too often there is the tendency of either policymakers or intelligence professionals to blur the division between the two. Just because one has the capability to do something doesn't mean that they plan to, intend to, or want to. So I think that distinction has to be made critically clear. And also I think it gets back to trying to make sure that we provide policymakers with as much insight as possible, either from technical means or from human means, both the extent of those capabilities and the potential impact, as well as the intentions of individuals, of governments. People were asking recently about, the situation in Ukraine and Russia, and I think to a large extent, Putin was deciding as he went along what his next chess move was going to be. He was the one who knew. Now he consulted maybe with a small group of advisors in terms of what he's going to do with Crimea, as well as along the border there. But as far as the actual decisions that he would take, I think that was based on his perception of the environment. And so when people say, well, why didn't we know that Russia or another country was going to do X, Y, or Z? Well, it's because they have not yet determined themselves sort of the best course of action to enhance their interests. Now, in opportunity analysis, this is where I think the intelligence community plays a critically important role. And I learned so much from John McLaughlin, who George Tenet refers to as the smartest man in the world because of his analytic breadth and depth over the years. And making sure that we're able to bring to policymakers an objective, non-advocacy intelligence briefing that we don't lean one way or another as far as a policy choice is concerned. But what we do is a rigorous job of identifying the implications, the pros and the cons, the likely impact of certain policy courses. We need to do that, though, in a manner that really does maintain that objectivity. And I just had lunch with some students here from the Security Studies program, where I said it's critically important that intelligence professionals always maintain their objectivity and non-advocacy position. Because as soon as you go into a discussion on a policy matter, and if you start to advocate for a certain policy course, it undermines the credibility of your intelligence briefing and your analysis. So you need to make sure that you're perceived as, and in reality you are, agnostic as far as that policy course, but for intelligence professionals to do their jobs well these days, it really requires them to have a mastery of the data, information, be able to process it and analyze it, but also then be able to field the questions of policymakers about, well, what happens if we do X? And we really need to be able to bring to bear whatever intelligence or experience or expertise or trend analysis that we've done in the past that will help give policymakers an insight into what those implications or results might be, and to tell them with what degree of confidence we have in those judgments.
Good afternoon, Barbara Protasio, U.S. Navy. My question is relating to your strategic communications plan, and what further events or actions are we going to be looking forward to hearing publicly from the CIA, and whether you are partnering with any other IC communities to discuss publicly what you are trying to share with the public in the United States.
That's a secret, I can't tell you. We're looking at various opportunities. I had the opportunity to go down to the University of Oklahoma a couple months ago and spoke there at Norman with former Senator Boren, chairman of the SSCI from the 90s. Spoken at the Council on Foreign Relations, co-sponsoring this conference. Our strategic plan that we have put out really identifies what our challenges are. And so we have a number of internal initiatives trying to address those challenges, which is making sure that we're able to close those intelligence gaps on our hard targets, our key priorities, making sure we're able to fulfill our global mission, making sure we're able to leverage technology in an optimal fashion to fulfill our mission, make sure we're able to recruit, retain, train, develop the world's best workforce, and doing all of this then under a constrained budget. And so what we're trying to do in CIA is to engage regularly with our workforce. I have a regular sort of monthly feature where I sit down with an interviewer like this and address questions that come from the workforce. But also, that's important because as the men and women of CIA who come from all over the country and many from all over the globe are having to deal with a lot of things that are in the media and some of the criticisms that are levied at intelligence agencies. It's important that I make sure that these dedicated Americans, many of whom have made great sacrifice on behalf of their country, continue to feel as though they're making a very important contribution to our national security that's appreciated not just by the agency's leadership, but also by the administration, the Congress, and the American people. So that dialogue with the agencies is important. But events like this, I think, are important as well. And so in discussions with Dean Boyd, the head of our public affairs, and others, I'm really looking for opportunities to be able to speak. Now, I know that there's a risk associated with that because sometimes I can only uncover so much, and it will, addressing certain issues and topics will beget more detailed questions that I'm going to have to say, we'll have to talk around it. But that's what our obligation is as CIA professionals. But I do think it's important because I have been dismayed at how the narrative seems to be skewed. And as I mentioned in my remarks, in the aftermath of 9/11, the narrative may have been skewed one way, and then the pendulum swings back. And these are important issues in the 21st century. It is very, very important that the American people have the opportunity to really understand what their intelligence community does, and they need to be able to express those sentiments to their elected representatives, and those elected representatives need to be able to carry out their responsibilities as far as oversight and legislation in an informed fashion. And that's my concern, that there's a lot of times a lot of misinformation, disinformation, or ignorance that are driving a number of these commentaries and actions. And to the extent that we can help to educate, inform, and uncover some of the things that we are doing on behalf of the American people, I think that just makes for a much better relationship between the intelligence community and the American people, and the world, too. I have spent a lot of time, as I know many of my partners in the intelligence community, hosting some visitors from overseas who have expressed their concerns about what the U.S. intelligence community is doing. And it's interesting to hear them talk because although a lot of political concerns have been expressed based on either distortions or even some realities, the intelligence professionals that we interact with from all the continents of the world really emphasize the importance of maintaining that relationship with the intelligence community and with CIA. They tremendously benefit from our engagement with them, from information sharing, from training, from teaching them what it means to be a professional intelligence service, making sure that they're not exploited by their political overseers, trying to ensure that they fulfill their responsibilities as they carry out their duties, to include humane treatment of individuals they might capture or detain or arrest. So I have found that over the last year, there's not been a drawing back of our intelligence partners from CIA, and I would argue that NSA probably has the same experience. If anything, they are worried that some of their uninformed political overseers or some of their uninformed populaces are going to force that pendulum away and try to put distance between their services and ours. And they don't see that in their interest, because just like we see the array of all those threats and challenges out there worldwide, they do as well. And they're very worried. And one look at the newspapers like today, looking what's happening in places like Iraq and Syria, it's really quite alarming.
Luke Lishan, a recent SSP graduate and currently at the National War College. So the CIA has a very long history of operating and analyzing ungoverned spaces and spaces of tremendous instability. And you had mentioned earlier in your speech that the CIA is a learning institution fundamentally. So I ask you, what are the lessons that the CIA has learned over the past decade in operating and analyzing ungoverned spaces that may present a threat to the United States? Thank you.
Wow, that's a tough question. We've learned a lot, and I've also learned the limits of what our capabilities are. And I truly believe that, I think I did mention in my remarks, that foreign governments, those that either are rather established and strong, or those that are very fragile and weak, recognize that the challenges they face, a lot of times internally, in different parts of their country, are far beyond the capability and capacity of their services to address, whether they be their intelligence or security military services. And they are looking for external assistance in order to stem the tide of extremist growth within their borders. And so what I have learned is that we can help a lot of these services with developing their pointy end of the spear and developing their capability to track down where terrorists or violent extremists reside, and giving them the tools, both in terms of intelligence collection, analysis, and how to address those threats. But it's quite apparent to me that there are a lot of countries right now that are facing much more than that terrorist challenge. They're facing some really deep-rooted and inherent instability that is so anchored in economic and social and sectarian and other problems. And I think it's a necessary but insufficient approach to just deal with issues related to counterterrorism. or try to prevent those safe havens from being used and exploited by these groups, whether we're talking about the Libyan deserts or Sinai or Yemen or Syria, wherever. We really need to be able to address a lot of those factors and conditions that are just fueling these fires that lead then extremists to gravitate toward these conflicts and these wars and these ungoverned spaces. And that's why I think there really needs to be a whole of government approach as we deal with these countries. So we have to make sure that we're not just putting money into counterterrorism programs. We need to make sure that we're addressing those issues related to economic insecurity, lack of educational opportunities in countries, lack of economic infrastructure that will promote either job growth or foreign investment in the countries. Because otherwise we're just losing the war. We can address the symptoms that are quite evident and dangerous that are manifesting themselves in these safe zones or safe havens and ungoverned spaces. But we need to go further upstream. And I think that's going to be the challenge of the next decades, how to address those forces that are really fueling these the forces of instability.
My name is Jared Foster. I'm with the United States Air Force. Quickly, in general, do you think that the agency or other three-letter agencies strike a proper balance between reporting, information, analysis, and actually direct action or kinetic, non-kinetic operations?
And there have been a lot of things written about that balance that should be struck in the agency, as well as what I have reportedly or purportedly said about that balance. And I think too frequently there are things that are sort of bucketed together. The agency has had a long history in the paramilitary arena, where at the direction of every president since President Truman, we have been asked to undertake certain missions that leverage our covert action authorities that fall into that paramilitary arena. That's always a tool, it's an arrow in the president's quiver that we need to continue to be ready to fulfill as the situation demands and as the president directs. So we are directed to do those things, and at the appropriate times, we need to make sure that we're dedicating the resources, we develop the capabilities, the capacities, the expertise inside. I do think that we need to make sure that after more than a decade of two very large military conflicts where the intelligence community has been heavily invested in Iraq and Afghanistan to support our warfighters and to support the foreign policy goals and objectives there, we need to make sure that we cover our global responsibilities. That's why in our strategic direction, I wanted to make sure that clearly in there was to fulfill our global mission and to address those gaps within our sort of hard target requirements. I don't have in that strategic direction, we need to be able to do this on the paramilitary front or something else. But what is embedded in there is that as we carry out our responsibilities on intelligence collection and analysis, counterintelligence, that covert action is something, unless the Congress decides that they want to take away CIA's covert action authorities, or unless the president decides, no, there's going to be no more covert action, we have an obligation to stand ready to fulfill those duties as assigned and as called upon. But I do believe that given the nature of and the complexity of the challenge we face today, we need to do a better job of collecting intelligence that is relevant, that is focused on the key national security challenges that we face as a nation. And we need to make sure that we're able to collect it securely, process it in a timely manner, analyze it rigorously and thoroughly, and then make sure we're able to present it to policymakers or other individuals that need to act upon it. And that's where I'm trying to put a lot of our focus and energy.
Yours will probably be the last question.
Director Brennan, this morning we discussed the importance of innovation and agility in the intelligence profession as we confront the challenges of the 21st century. What are you doing to transform the traditional government workforce and promotion system at CIA to reward and encourage these attributes, both in the current workforce and also to attract new talent?
Boy, that's another tough one. one of my last jobs at the agency was as Deputy Executive Director, which was basically the Deputy Chief Operating Officer, where this was in the early 2000s, and there was a great effort to try to reform the pay and promotion system, pay for performance, and there are a lot of equities and sort of politics involved in all of that. And we have our GS schedule that we're within. We need to make sure that we're not held hostage to a promotion and grade system that was developed in the 20th century. We may have to adhere to it from a standpoint of salary structure, but what we've tried to do in the agency, and we're trying to do more of it, is to ensure that the people who are working the hardest and who are the most talented have the opportunities to rise up through the system. Over the past 6 months or so, we just have recently initiated a seminar. It's called the DCIA seminar, the Director Seminar, where we've identified some of the real upcoming stars within the agency to have the opportunity over the course of a 6-month period of time to spend a lot of time outside the agency, not just with the rest of the government, but going to the private sector, seeing what life is like outside in the private sector, and bringing some of those practices and perspectives back into the agency. I benefited greatly from my 3-year sojourn in the private sector, seeing that Congress doesn't appropriate money to everybody, and understanding what it means to actually run a business. So I think what we want to do is to give more exposure to folks on the outside, not just in terms of the way we do our work, but also management and leadership practices. And so these are individuals who are at that management leadership structure. And there are so many things that we are trying to do from the standpoint of ensuring that our sponsorship and mentorship program is robust, making sure that our evaluation system is fair, and making sure that, again, there's going to be an equal opportunity for people to explore the different professional paths within the agency, which is one of the great things about CIA. We have multiple missions, and as I was just saying to the Georgetown students here, that people have come to the agency from all different backgrounds, and it's amazing that you come in the door doing one thing, and over the course of one's career, you can really experience a lot of other things. So I want to make sure that the agency is a place where people really feel good about the contribution that they're making on a daily basis. The recognition and reward system has to be conducive to that type of environment. Being in a government organization, there are limitations in terms of what you can do, even though Director of CIA has special authorities. But I think this is going to be an evolving process, because when I think about the people who are coming to the agency today, they come in with a lot different experiences and expectations than those who came in the past. And I want to make sure that the flow of blood into the agency is going to stay fresh and strong. And they need to come in not just recognizing they're going to make a contribution in terms of public service, but also that the agency's structure and leadership is going to be able to recognize, acknowledge, and reward the contributions they make.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you.
Excellent.